What a chivalrous group they are. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Williams. I'm Director of the Wheeler Centre, and I'm delighted to chair tonight's debate. The topic for tonight's debate is outlined on the order paper, and it is that coal-fired power will soon be obsolete. Sometimes we're prescient in our topics for these things, and it feels like none more so than tonight. It's a topic that has been much discussed. We hope you'll find tonight's proceedings passionate, edifying, civil, and entertaining. We have two very distinguished panels. It is time to begin the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, the proposition before this House is that coal-fired power will soon be obsolete. I invite Bob Brown to address this House for his arguments for the affirmative.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, coal-fired power will soon be obsolete, but I'm very, very nervous here tonight because if our opponents want to run the argument that that's wrong, that coal-fired power is already obsolete, we concede. We're finished. The fact is that coal-fired power is not only obsolete, it's very last century, it's dirty, it's dangerous, it's unhealthy, it's destructive, and it's unnecessary, and it's expensive. Now, let me begin with a little from the last week as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report mooting that if we continue to burn coal and other fossil fuels, we're headed for a planet that may be 4 to 5 degrees hotter by the end of this century. And those of you who listen to Radio National may have heard Fran Kelly asked a leading scientist at ANU during the week, what would that mean? And the scientist came back straight with, we will not be here. This isn't a trivial matter. This is about the survival of life on our beautiful little planet. And this planet's beautifully positioned 93 million miles from the nearest nuclear reactor we need, and that is the sun, which, however, at that distance provides us with the potential for all the energy we need without wrecking our own nest and our own ability to survive on the planet. Out there is Mars. It's got a very carbon dioxide thin planet. It's at minus 50 degrees. Might have had life, there's none there now. Over there in the morning is Venus, carbon dioxide rich atmosphere. 450 degrees centigrade, no life. Here on this little planet Earth, in the middle, we have the perfect balance. And we've had it for the last 70 million years, and indeed the last 70,000 years when we look at the evolution of our species on this planet and this great intelligence on this planet. And we've stayed within very narrow confines. And one of the things we haven't done has been to disrupt the conditions that made this planet different to Mars and this planet different to Venus. And if we continue to burn coal and fossil fuels, and particularly take it out of the ground and export it out of this country, which is the world's second biggest exporter of coal, but under great pressure from those who want to profit out of the danger of upsetting this planet's future, then we're headed at our own hand towards Venus and a fiery future in which we simply can't exist, and we do not need to take the risk. There's been no new coal-fired power station in this country in the last decade, and there's none planned in the next decade. Enough said about those who say it's the cheapest option. However, this is an industry which is dependent upon public largesse, billions of dollars needed to get it going. And anybody who wants to argue with that should have listened to the press conference yesterday when Indian Prime Minister Modi was in Queensland sitting next to Liberal Premier Cameron Newman and the Treasurer, Seeley, who said, no, we can't get the coal, the biggest coal deposits in Australia, out of the Galilee Basin and export it because, in brackets, silence, no bank in the world has put its hand up to support it. It's simply not a goer. So what they're going to do is put public money into railing the coal to the 6 planned mega coal ports inside the Great Barrier Reef for export overseas to triple the per capita output of greenhouse gases to threaten us. We're on trajectory. And if we do that, we will go to 4 to 5 degrees heating by the end of this century, making it untenable for human life, certainly for the expected 10 billions of us. Future of cruelty, destruction, despair. Go with the proposal that coal-fired power is okay. We'll hear some hypotheticals from the opposition tonight. One being that you can have clean coal. Well, they've been promising that since I was a boy. Coal gas, carbon dioxide sequestration, none of it in Australia. And I ask every panellist on the opposite side to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, which of the large power stations in Australia they can fit clean coal devices to in the coming years, as this ageing, dirty, polluting coal-fired power station set we've got in this country rumbles on into the future, polluting our atmosphere. They won't name one. And if you do add the so-called clean coal technology, which is not available anywhere on earth for the large power stations, a few small ones, couple in America and Canada, you can't fit them to the power stations we have in Australia. It is not an option. Coal is dirty. That is it. It can't be fixed as far as the coal-fired power stations of this country without incredible public money taken away from hospitals, schools, defence, security, goes into this industry, as they're planning to do in Queensland, to export their coal to India. Now, another thing is, well, if we don't export coal, people overseas will be poor. They'll be left energy poor and therefore in poverty. Let me quote Richard Dennis from the Australia Institute. Africa has saved tens of billions of dollars by jumping from no phones to mobile phones. They will save tens of billions of dollars more by jumping from no electricity to renewable energy, especially small scale, especially solar and wind. The only people who think the best way to tackle energy poverty is to spend billions on coal plants, poles and wires are in the coal industry itself. You're going to hear a bit of that from our opponents tonight. Listen carefully, ladies and gentlemen, because it is not a goer. The economists know we should just start investing in local clean energy solutions. We're in the sunny country. We're wealthy. We can convert with 2% change of global economy to a fossil fuel-free future without warming our atmosphere and threatening our future, ourselves and all our fellow creatures on this planet. All it takes is the intelligence, the ethical investment, and the will to do it. Coal-fired power, soon obsolete. It is obsolete and needs to be put into the dustbin of history. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Nikki Williams.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For a self-professed optimist, Mr. Brown's assertions and aspirations were predictable, but the doom, the gloom and the boom was emotive and unhelpful. I'm not going to deal in articles of faith. I'm going to present some cold, hard facts, shining a light, I hope, on the progressive, significant and, yes, you guessed it, growing role of coal-fired power for the foreseeable future. Coal is the incumbent energy of choice for electricity generation globally. And this incumbency makes it easy to argue that coal is just defending its patch and on the way out. But if that were true, why would Indian Prime Minister Modi declare, as he did yesterday, that resources, and specifically our coal, have vast potential to power India's urbanisation and conversion to a global manufacturing hub. It will in fact largely be coal that brings electricity to the homes of the 300 million Indians who currently live without it. Now let's be clear. The coal industry has long accepted the science of climate change, long accepted that carbon emissions from burning coal are a problem and that they must be reduced. That's where a rigorous, fact-based assessment of existing and future trends in coal use and why those trends point to large increases in coal-fired electricity between now and 2050 are essential. And it's technological innovation, more efficient power stations, carbon capture and storage, next-generation renewables and nuclear, which will deliver economic growth and climate mitigation simultaneously. It's for good reason that coal supplies 40% of the world's electricity, that it will soon surpass oil as the world's largest source of primary energy, and that it will continue to be widely relied upon to power development. Coal is available from over 100 countries in the world, and that abundance means competitive pricing and security. That's why coal-fired electricity is a compelling choice the world over. We've heard an elegy on coal, but the steel and aluminium planes which delivered some debaters here tonight, this auditorium, the sound and vision system, your smartphones, the homes and offices you left to get here, the buses, bikes, cars that you used, all depend on coal. They all use coal-fired electricity, either directly in their fabrication or their daily operation. We're a long way off solar-powered aviation or eliminating steel, which can only be made using coal. Coal-fired electricity is embedded in almost every good or service we use. And that's not a rapturous endorsement, it's a simple fact. World leaders, the International Energy Agency, the EU, the OECD, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, all acknowledge that coal is here to stay and that low-emission coal technologies are necessary to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that without these low-emission coal technologies, the global cost of mitigation will increase by 17 to 30%. These costs perhaps may have been a driver of last week's pledge by China and the US to finance at an accelerated rate the development of advanced coal technologies. There are 12 pilots in China today, 10 in Australia, and the first industrial-scale low-emission coal-fired plant is up and running in Canada. In Australia, coal is a $60 billion sector, our second largest export, and generates 78% of our energy. We produce roughly 400 million tonnes a year and export around about 330 million tonnes. The world, on the other hand, consumes 7 billion tonnes of coal a year, and 4 billion of those tonnes are in China alone. Global energy demand is projected to double between now and 2030. Each year, China increases her electricity generating capacity by Australia's total electricity generating capacity. She is building coal-fired power stations at the rate of one every few weeks. If we switched off the lights in Australia and left tomorrow, China would replace our total greenhouse gas emissions in just 4 months. 4% of China's power comes from gas, 7% from renewables, including hydro, and nuclear, I think, is about 1%. Now, the share of these energy sources will and should increase over time, but that is not the end of coal in China. In fact, coal use will increase by some 50% between now and 2040, when coal's share of the energy mix will stand at about 55%. Asserting that China is phasing out coal is mythical, not factual, because 6 billion tonnes of coal will be burnt in 2040 compared to the 4 billion tonnes that they burn today. Coal-fired power is looking far from obsolete in China. And why is China investing in fuel diversity? Firstly, energy is agnostic, neither good nor evil. Countries use the fuels that are widely available, low cost and secure. Secondly, there is a proven nexus between energy use and economic development. Despite concerted efforts to debunk the sort of progressive role of coal to eradicating poverty and creating wealth, it is coal which transformed the developed world into the one which we enjoy today, and the developing world knows it. We can't deny poor countries affordable electrification and better living standards. 1.3 billion people lack a single electric light bulb in their home. Stop and think what that means. More than half the world's people cook with wood, dung or charcoal in squalid, smoke-filled huts or shanties, and 3.5 million of those people die from that internal air pollution every year. There's no protection from malarial mosquitoes, extreme heat or cold. No refrigeration to preserve food or medications. Scavenging food, finding fuel and water define each day. And in 2013, diarrhoea, malaria, pneumonia and complications in childbirth accounted for 6.3 million deaths in children under 5. Currently, solar and wind can't provide electricity 24/7. Sporadic and unreliable, renewables have to be backed up by fossil or nuclear power to avoid blackouts. And whilst they're available at commercial scale in some countries like Germany, they remain unable to power commerce reliably and affordably. And where Germany generates 27% of its power from renewables currently, it also generates 25% of its power from its own coal. And it is building 11 new coal-fired power stations, one of which was opened earlier this year and is, in fact, the largest in Europe. Sadly, the German economy is also shrinking. Their energy costs are now amongst the highest in the world, and last year, BMW moved its manufacturing to the United States, where electricity prices were 80% cheaper than those in Germany, because Germany has indeed run out of time as far as the efficiency of its current renewable-based generating system. Coal reserves are abundant, coal-fired electricity is reliable, price competitive, and continues to underpin energy-intensive manufacturing. Those who argue that coal use must and will cease and that renewables can be adopted immediately, I think make themselves peripheral to the energy debate because they've closed their eyes and ears to the reality of coal use, the expense and unreliability of renewables, and the current impossibility of powering the world from them. Thank you.
Lane Crockett.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, just before I start, I want to ensure there's no confusion about who's arguing what. Energy debates can be highly technical, complex, and sometimes confusing. So I have a couple of props. For the affirmative, coal will be obsolete team. I have a wind turbine and I have a solar torch. This is solar with storage. Okay, and for the negative, I have a coal briquette, fresh from the Latrobe Valley. Be careful not to touch that, it's a little bit dirty. Okay, To assist in holding a truly factual conversation without influence from entrenched interests, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination for about the next 8 minutes. So can you please imagine that I am something like an intergalactic energy advisor, and I've come to Earth to do an assessment of power generation choices with a focus on Australia. I have a limited knowledge of the energy systems here, but I've been granted an audience with senior government energy officials who will answer my questions. So what follows is a summary of the interview. By the way, this is the first time I've been to Earth and it's truly beautiful. Now, I will start with the interview with basic questions like inquiring the makeup of the sector. So in Australia, the stationary energy mix, I'm told, is around 75% coal, 10% hydro, 10% gas, 5% wind and biomass, and about 3 gigawatts of solar PV, mostly located on roofs of houses, small businesses and commercial properties. So I think, given coal is the dominant fuel in power generation today, I ask, what are the impacts? Now, the officials advised me that a large coal power stations were built in the late last century to meet rising demand and have powered Australia for the last 50 to 60 years. However, there are drawbacks, which are mainly health and environmental. Burning coal emits carbon dioxide, nitrous oxides, sulphur oxides and particulates. I ask, well, what is the impact on human health of these pollutants? They advise that these pollutants contribute to cardiovascular, respiratory, neurological, reproduction, endocrine and kidney disorders and cancers. The level of risk depends on population density. In countries such as China, there are as many as 670,000 deaths per year from burning coal. And even in a more sparsely populated Australia, health professionals advise burning coal for power leads to the early death of 1,500 Australians every year. So are there any other impacts I ask? Well, the emissions of carbon dioxide and other warming gases are causing rising temperatures and acidifying our oceans. Rising temperatures lead to more extreme weather events such as droughts, bushfires and storms. And to attempt to limit this problem, countries have agreed to limit the warming to 2 degrees from pre-industrial levels, although there is no guarantee that this is a safe level. And that begs the question, so I ask, what impact could this international agreement have on the coal industry? I am told that it is estimated that 80% of coal reserves cannot be burned unless they can be done so without producing carbon emissions. Now, this has created a risk for investors in coal-based infrastructure, with nearly 200 institutions and local governments representing over 50 billion in assets already having pledged to divest from fossil fuels. And in Australia, it is generally accepted in business circles that it is not possible to fund a new coal-fired power station. I ask about the ability to capture the emissions from burning coal. Will that work? Well, yes, I'm told. The processing technology exists. It has been around for some 10 years or so, thanks to the oil and gas industry. However, the problem is finding suitable underground cavities and the associated infrastructure costs. The Bureau of Resources and Energy Economics estimates that the cost of carbon capture and storage will add an additional $100 per megawatt on top of generation costs, and there are limited opportunities for future cost reductions. Now, getting back to the economics, what is the cost to Australian society of burning coal? Well, I'm advised that the International Monetary Fund recently found that coal-fired power should attract a corrective fuel tax of around $7 billion per year to offset the health and environmental cost to society. Now, this equates to a cost burden of around $50 per megawatt hour of electricity produced. So I ask, are the coal-fired generators taxed or penalised for causing this cost burden cost burden to society? No, is the response. Australia recently had a price on carbon emissions which created an impost on coal-fired generators at around $20 per megawatt hour, but that has just been removed. So what government policies are in place to address this issue? Well, I'm advised there's a renewable energy target designed to support the transition to clean generation technologies such as wind and solar. However, this is under review, so investment has stalled. There is also an emissions reduction fund, which is yet to start, but it should be noted the government's climate advisory body says it is inadequate and not consistent with meeting a maximum of 2 degrees of warming. Some commentators assert that renewables are highly subsidised relative to coal. However, the coal-fired generation sector itself receives several subsidies, such as below-market fuel supplies, contracts from state governments. So is there a societal expectation that the energy sector will transition to clean energy? Yes, I'm told. There already exists an oversupply of coal-fired generation in the Australian electricity sector, and some 8 gigawatts of capacity could be retired today without putting security of supply at risk. Also, there have been many studies looking into the future costs of generation technologies. Again, the Bureau of Resources and Energy Economics forecast clean technologies such as solar and wind are already competitive with new coal, and that's even without a carbon price. There's also been an extraordinary take-up of PV on rooftops as homeowners can produce their own energy more cheaply that can be delivered from the grid. I'm curious, has any research been done on community attitudes towards coal versus the alternative? Yes. Pacific Hydro commissioned an independent poll that found that 94% of Australians prefer power to be generated from anything other than coal. What about employment if coal were to be closed down? I'm advised that the transition will attract thousands of jobs and that the skills needed on coal-fired power stations are directly transferable to other clean technologies. And jobs in clean energy are also found to be safer and healthier. So let me reflect for a moment on all that. Coal-fired power harms human health, impacts on the environment and the climate, resulting in a societal cost burden. There are low-cost alternatives available now, and investment in coal infrastructure is considered risky because the world has effectively agreed to limit its use. So what is the biggest barrier to making the shift to clean energy? I'm told this is a complex question, but the officials will do their best to answer it. I'm told the energy markets are experiencing substantial transition. Regulators are struggling to keep pace, and large incumbent energy companies with billions invested in existing infrastructure find it difficult to react quickly. Transition means writing down the value of high emissions assets, which will impact shareholder returns. Economic systems are not well designed to cope with the fast rate of change, and the uncertainty could be addressed by governments setting clear mid and long-term targets. But if the uncertainty continues, the transition will not be managed in an orderly fashion, and there's significant risk there will be a disruptive change. This will be far more damaging for the Australian economy. I thank the officials for their frank and fearless advice, and I will deliver my findings in my summing up.
Richard Aldous.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There is nothing that I would like more than to see a substantial reduction or even the elimination of emissions from fossil fuel in the next 10 to 15 years. You've heard from the members from the Affirmative the disaster scenario of what faces the world. You've heard from our first speaker about the incredible momentum that exists in the amount of coal that's being consumed and the power stations that are being built. There's no doubt about it, we're in a pretty tough situation globally, and it needs action. We're not here to debate whether we want to stop climate change tonight. We're here to debate whether the fossil fuel power stations, where the coal-fired power stations are absolutely obsolete. And let me tell you, the coal-fired power stations, unfortunately, are going to be here for many, many decades. And I want to set out the reasons for that. And this is despite the efforts of people like Bob Brown, the Greens, the team here for the Affirmative. It's despite the groundswell of opinion around the world that wants to rein in climate change, like I'm sure many of you do here tonight. But it's also despite the efforts of people like myself that are involved in progressing carbon capture technology, which can break the nexus between emissions and the use of coal. All of these things, we're in a very, very difficult situation. So let me just unroll the three elements that underpin my argument and why I think the motion in front of us is actually wrong, even though we would like it to be true. And they are this. The first one is that we've got an enormous amount of economic growth in China and India, and that is based substantially on coal-fired power. The second one is that we have an enormous amount of political inertia in our own system and in systems around the world. And associated with that, actually, infrastructure and power infrastructure inertia as well, and I'll come to that in a minute. And the third element is this carbon capture and storage, and it really is very much the third element. You've heard a lot about renewables. I'll talk a little bit about how carbon capture and storage may assist us in this debate, and actually, whatever these things happen, coal-fired power stations are here to stay for many, many decades, whether we like it or not. So let's just unpack those arguments. To start with China and India, you heard from our first speaker about just that massive growth. All industrial economies, when they start from an agricultural economy going into an industrial economy, they increase massively their use of energy and raw materials. China's halfway through this and will keep on going. You've heard that they're already saying, yes, we're going to be expanding our emissions until 2030. It's when we'll peak 2035. So they're not going to be reining back their emissions in the short term. And a lot of coal-fired power stations that have been built there every week or two with 50-year lives and costing billions of dollars are not going to be switched off 2 or 3 years after they've been switched on. They are going to be here for decades. And what's unfortunate is that right behind this, we've got India. India's still largely an agricultural economy that's coming up the first stage of what China has been through and Korea and Japan went through 30, 40, 50 years ago. When they kick in behind this, it's going to get even worse. They've got a big coal-fired problem, or coal-fired use, as you've heard, and it's going to continue. I met with a Minister for Energy from India about 3 or 4 years ago, and he told me that in the last 5 years, he'd connected over 100,000 small communities and villages to power for the first time. And they could only afford to do that with coal. No CCS, just coal. And what's more, they've got many hundreds of thousands of such communities still to go. Now, what are they going to do from a political point of view? Are they going to switch off the coal-fired power stations? No. The last point, let's come to carbon capture and storage. This technology's been in play for about 20 years now. There's a major project in the North Sea that's been injecting 1 million tonnes of CO2 a year for 20 years. Without mishap, it's been doing very nicely. And I might add, that was done because of a carbon price that was imposed upon them in Norway. The company said, we're either going to pay $30 a tonne to put our CO2 up the stack into the atmosphere, or we inject it into the ground, and they decided to do that. There's now a number of coal-fired power stations that are actually operating with carbon capture and storage. There was one opened a couple of weeks ago in Canada that's also storing 1 million tonnes a year. It's a retrofit. It's one of those old power stations that's been refurbished to capture the CO2. 95% of the CO2 is being captured and it's being piped. Now, what we've got here is the gas industry in reverse. Rather than we produce gas, we bring it to our cities, we burn it. What we'll be doing now is capturing the CO2, sending it back down the pipelines and injecting it deep into the earth, into depleted gas fields or into porous rocks where there's water. We've got an enormous amount of capacity, both around Australia and globally, to do that. This is the technology that we'll be using. By 2050, it's estimated that this industry will be bigger than the world's oil industry today. And it's just what we've seen with LNG. 30 years ago, we had no LNG. We had all those assets in the Northwest Shelf. Now we've got a multi-billion-dollar industry exporting LNG. So these things can change. They don't change quickly, but by 2050, this will be the game. So let's just come to emissions. This debate is not about coal or about, well, the issue is not about coal or gas or oil, it's about emissions. Climate change is caused by emissions. What we've got to do is cut that nexus between the use of the fossil fuels and the emissions themselves. Coal has had a long history. It's, in my opinion, humans will find it too valuable in terms of its energy content and also its carbon content to leave in the ground. And they will find a way of using it, our societies will find a way of using it in the future. And carbon capture and storage is almost certainly going to be one of those ways. What we've got to do is get rid of the emissions, rein in climate change, and carbon capture and storage is a critical part of that. I'm firmly of a believer that there's been a big bias by demonising coal, which is sort of what we're here to do tonight. Nobody wants climate change, therefore let's get rid of coal. That's not the solution. It's not going to happen for the reasons I've set out. But more to the point, by taking that view, and some of the green groups have actually said, oh, we don't want carbon capture and storage, don't do that. It's just prolonging coal. But hey, we've got a coal problem. We've got to fix it. And this is what we need to do. We need to stop the bias towards renewables. We need renewables. We need carbon capture and storage. And we need both of them as much as we can get. The subsidies going to renewables around the world have been 2 orders of magnitude, 1,000 times more, between 100 and 1,000 times more than have gone into carbon capture and storage because of the green pushing against coal and gas. So we've got to be careful about what we're doing here. I'm advocating that the green groups start to take on board carbon capture and storage as part of the solution. If we're going to rein in this problem, we need carbon capture and storage now. We need to develop it. We need to roll out the technology that's already proven. It's in place and happening. And some of the groups are responding to that. You'll see some of the NGOs are now supporting the need for carbon capture and storage, particularly on power stations that have already been built. Those power stations that are going to be with us for another 30, 40, 50 years. They're not going to be switched off. If we can convert them to carbon capture and storage, we've got a way of reining in the problem. I think we're going to be struggling to rein in the problem of climate change, but one thing I'm certain about is that coal is going to be with us for a long time, and that coal-fired power stations are going to be with us for a long time. And I'd urge you to not vote with what you'd like to happen, but just vote with the facts for the debate tonight. Thank you.
Mike Sanderford.
Thanks very much. I'm going to begin to say I'm totally with the PM on this. We've got to stop demonising coal. And we should be feeling sorry for the coal generators. Bear with me with a little geological indulgence. Coal is a remarkable substance. The world would be different without it. The carbon locked up in coal, if it were not in the coal in the ground, but were in the atmosphere, would mean we wouldn't have ice caps on the planet today, and the seas would be 100 metres higher. Coal is a remarkable substance. It's not alone. Let me tell you about another substance which is remarkable, the mineral called chrysotile. Chrysotile is the mineral of the mineral group serpentine. Serpentine has remarkable properties. The Earth would literally be different without serpentine. Serpentine makes plate tectonics works. It allows this planet to have mountains, and from those mountains come our soils and sediments, which give our fertility and host our energy resources. Chrysotile has another property. It's beautiful. It grows as fibrous bundles. You know it. It's soft. It's malleable. You can use it, and it has some unique qualities. You know it as asbestos. The problem, when we put it into our environment, is it's pretty nasty. And if we don't use it properly, it's lethal. So let's not demonise chrysotile, let's not demonise coal, but take a hard look at how we use those to our benefit or otherwise. So I'm totally with the PM on that. No more demonising coal. So, what's the problem with coal-fired power? The problem is not that we can't make coal clean, and here I take a slight difference with Bob. We can with appropriate incentives. There's no doubt we can clean it up. We have cleaned it up in the past. We've got the SOx's and NOx's out. Acid rain is not nearly the problem it used to be. We don't have pea super fogs in London anymore. We have learnt to clean it up, but it does come at a cost. But we can do it if we put our minds to it. And the problem is not that coal doesn't make cheap energy. It does, especially if we discount the cost to future generations of potential climate change. And it's not that it can't help alleviate poverty. It can. But it's not the only thing. As an incidental, I've just come back from Bhutan, 3-week fieldwork, geological fieldwork in Bhutan. Bhutan is a developing country. Gee, is it a steep country. That's one hard country to get electricity around. Yet it has 98% electrification, the highest rate of any developing country, and not a skerrick of fossil fuel generation. What does it have which is different from India? It has a willful government. That's what makes a difference to alleviating poverty. Of course, energy access services is important. So what's the problem with coal? To make coal-fired power, we need to do it at scale, and that means we need to make it in places which increasingly put it at cost disadvantage, even if those places are the places it's already being made. And the poor old coal generators just don't get it. Like the cork in the wine bottle, the film in the camera, the landline telephone, the carbon paper in the typewriter. Who remembers this? The coal generators are not getting what distributed technologies are about to do to them because they don't get the power of Kreider's law. And why is that? Well, it's pretty much an old story. Any incumbent technology likes to look back at its achievements, to declare the great victories it's already won, instead of looking ahead to the turbulent waters. And when they look around to the turbulent waters, they tend to behave a bit like the schoolyard bully in the summer holidays, when all the other kids have gone home. They'll say, it shouldn't be like this. It's not fair. But they won't adapt. By the time they do, it'll be too late. So to make my case, I'm going to give you a bit of context and 2 exhibits. The first is electricity prices. How much do you pay for electricity here in Victoria? Well, a standing offer for electricity is about 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Of course, if you ask your retailer how much they'll discount it if you pay it on time, they'll give you about 8 cents off straight away. What's the wholesale price of electricity in Victoria today? It's under 4 cents a kilowatt hour. It's half what the discount the retailer will give you. Generation is just not part of the energy problem. It's the distribution which is the issue. So, 2 exhibits. My first, I've already showed you. Carbon paper. At least some of you will remember using this stuff. My first thesis was written on this stuff 35 years ago. That's about the expected life of an average coal-fired power station. 35 years ago, this was the technology by which we conveyed information. The staggering changes we could never have guessed from then. I could never have guessed how my students would write their thesis, do their virtual library work, conduct their research in this information age. I could never have guessed my second exhibit, which holds the digital autobiography, well, a part of my life, but all my children's life. It holds more books than I could ever expect to read, more music than I could ever expect to listen, and I carry it around in my pocket. Why on earth? All that stuff happens to have a seismometer and a GPS on it thrown in, and it's mainly meant just so I can ring my wife, tell her when I'm coming home or not. Amazing. And what's driven that? What's happened? Step back, 25 years. I bought my first hard disk 25 years ago. It was a revolution. How much did it cost? $2,000. How big was it? 20 megabytes. 2 terabytes for $100. A million-fold reduction in the cost of information storage in 25 years. That is staggering. It beggars belief. And it's Kreider's law. Every year for 30 years, the cost of storage, information storage, has come down by a factor of 2 as the density of storage has gone up. What happened? The technology got to a place where we could invent totally ridiculous things to do with information storage, like carry around all the music that we would ever be able to listen to in our life, in our pocket all day long. What a ridiculous thing to do. But it drove the technology. So what's going to happen in the future? Well, the distributed technologies are reinventing the way in which electricity is doing. We know about PV, but the elephant in the room, the genie in the bottle, is chemical storage. And we don't need a $1 million times reduction. We need a 10 times reduction in the cost of energy storage. And when that comes, it's going to revolutionise the grid. And it's the grid which is going to make coal-fired power from distant realms at large scale obsolete. I don't know. I can't pretend to know what the grid will look like once storage starts to decentralise the grid. But neither could I know what information technology would do over 35 years to technologies like this. I can show this to my children, and they're sitting down here, and they laughed at the idea that I could write a thesis on that. I imagine their children will look at us and say, when they see coal, and you burnt that stuff? Thank you.
Cynthia Davidson.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. I have a mobile phone too, but I have learned that you just can't download electricity from the internet. Now, dealing with climate change, which you've heard quite a lot about tonight, isn't a scientific question. It is also an economic question, a moral question, a political question, and a technological question. Now, tonight, I'm not going to concentrate on the science and the technology so much. Other people will do that. I want to talk about the economics and the morality of it. It is certainly true that coal-fired power will not be technologically obsolete in the near future, contrary to the proponent's argument, because we are not seeing any disruptive or Schumpeterian innovation in power innovation like we have seen in information technology. So, absent nuclear fusion, coal-fired power is going to be with us for a long, long time. The real question that I want to address is whether or not coal-fired power is morally obsolete, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and discuss morality in terms of economics. Now, economics involves trade-offs. How much of this do we have to give up to get a little bit of that? Now, as economists, we often trade off costs and benefits. Now, it is totally true, as the proponents have suggested, that the social costs of carbon are greater than zero. They are not trivial, they can actually be quite large. That does not automatically make coal a bad thing. The mere existence of a social cost doesn't make for an externality. Rather, we have to demonstrate in equilibrium that the benefits, the social benefits of coal are not greater than the social costs. And this is quite a difficult argument to make, and I suspect the proponents will fail to convince in that area. Some background: the International Energy Agency states that some 68% of world electricity is generated by fossil fuels at the moment. The single largest fossil fuel is coal, and it turns out 40% of the world's electricity is coal-fired power. So all electricity in here tonight has come from brown coal, as it turns out. Now, the material benefits of our entire civilization is built on cheap and reliable energy, and in practice, that means coal. Now, our proponents have told us that our lifestyle, the way we live, could be Mars or Venus, is totally unsustainable. But to be quite honest, that's an immoral argument which requires them to nominate those people who should be denied the benefits of modern civilization. So, who are these people who will not receive the benefits of modern medicine? Who are these people who will not receive the benefits of labor-saving devices? Who are the people who should not enjoy the comforts and longevity that cheap and reliable energy provides? As it turns out, we live in a world where far too many people already are excluded from the good life that we enjoy ourselves, and our proponents want there to be more of those people. Now, we know what an energy-deprived world looks like. That is the world before the Industrial Revolution, before the invention of the steam engine. This is a world where animal and muscle power of human beings powered our civilization. That is a civilization made possible by the invention of the whip, as opposed to the steam engine. Now, in that world, there was renewable energy, there was wind power and hydro, but these made negligible contributions to the total energy mix in that world because it was diffuse and unreliable. That remains the case today. Environmentalists oppose the building of dams, Bob. Wind does not blow all the time. The sun doesn't shine all day. And as William Jevons said in 1865, remains true today, with coal almost any feat is possible or easy. Without it, we are thrown into the laborious poverty of earlier times. So ask yourself this: who here would give up modern medical technology if we gave up coal? Who here wants to return to a life expectancy of 36 years? Who here actually wants to live by the sweat of their brow? Without access to energy-dense, abundant, versatile, reliable and affordable coal, everybody in this room would get that opportunity. Ask yourself this: who here thinks the whip is a greater invention than the steam engine? So yes, coal power imposes costs on society. The benefits of the coal power far outweigh those costs. The thing to remember is 19th century England was just as polluted as modern China is today. Since that time, they've increased their fossil fuel usage. They have cleaned up their environment, because a clean environment, we know, is a superior good. As our incomes rise, so demand for cleaner environments rise, which is why Western economies have increased fossil fuel usage and coal and had a cleaner environment and had all the good things that we associate with abundant energy. Those who would argue against coal-fired powered electricity are engaged in what the great economist Harold Demsetz labelled as nirvana economics. They make three mistakes. The first mistake in nirvana economics is the assumption that people can be different. The second mistake is that there are free lunches. The third mistake is that the grass will be greener on the other side. Now, we know people do not want to give up their current standards of living. People do not want to sacrifice for the unknown generations to come. People who do not share our current standard of living aspire to our current standard of living. They don't want to live in huts with dung fires. They want to have electricity, running water, flushing toilets, things like this, consumer goods. Proposed alternatives to coal-fired electricity usually constitute a free lunch. Energy will appear somehow by magic. The biggest threat to coal-powered power is gas. Now I have to concentrate very carefully to pronounce this correctly. The biggest competitor to coal is fracking gas in the United States. I don't think our proponents are big fans of fracking. Wonderful things should happen. But how do we address the issues? The costs associated with coal are non-trivial. This is true. We all agree on this. But the proponents want us to believe or live in a finite world. Yet the most valuable resource we have is infinite. Human ingenuity, combined, of course, with cheap, abundant and reliable energy from fossil fuels and coal, has enabled us to lift our living standards in a very short period of time above that of animals. There is no reason to believe that human ingenuity won't work to ensure a viable and prosperous future. Our proponents want us to believe that we are imposing huge costs on future generations. Maybe. This is an open question. We cannot know what future generations will experience or what their preferences would be. We do know, however, that the proponent's solution would deprive current generations of the very high standard of living we ourselves enjoy today. By depriving people of access to cheap, reliable and abundant energy, we are not just imposing our preferences on those people, we are imposing poverty on those people too. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. There is a lot to process there and a lot to think about there, and an opportunity for you to respond to our six extraordinary speakers this evening. Just before we go on, there's an utterly offensive thing that's a blight on this stage that I just have to get rid of. I would hate a prop to bias an audience one way or the other, so we'll sit that there. You have a chance to give us your contribution now. What we would ask is that you limit that contribution to a minute.
In the late 1940s, early 1950s, Australia decided that at least part of our power would be provided by hydro when the Snowy Mountains was built. It took enormous political will to make that so, and I think it's going to take enormous political will to change our current energy mix. Where do we get that energy, that political energy, that political will from?
Thank you, Dan. In fact, give Dan a round of applause. You can applaud each other after your contributions. Would anyone on the panel care to respond to that query?
Yes. Yeah, indeed. Well, we're in a democracy and the political will comes from the people. And there's an election on Saturday week in this state in which the current government wants to export brown coal for people to burn overseas as well as burning it here, while turning their back on baseload solar power and renewable energy, and particularly, and the media's not good at reporting this, energy efficiency. That's turning off. I turned off the dressing room lights as I came up here from down in the green room just a while ago. I feel very good about that. Somewhere there's coal not being burnt because of it. The will comes from the people. The options are there. It's just up to us to take it and demand that we secure the future so that we don't have this menace of climate change hawking our grandchildren and their grandchildren. And we can do it. The options, this team has put forward the terrific options we've got available. This is the lucky, wealthy country. And the opponents who say, you know, you've got to depend on coal for all our medicines and so on, it's like saying the horse and buggy needs to be brought back and given to every other country because that's how we got here, utilising that energy. If only somebody could invent a way of stopping horses from dropping droppings on the street, it would still be with us. It's nonsense, it's obsolete. And renewable energy and energy efficiency is here, it's cheaper, and it's safe.
I think it's... I think it's a very important question because in this country, our energy debate over the last years has been very polemical, very divided, and political will has not really been on display for the simple reason that there's been too much response to populist causes. And the reality is that governments know that there are a number of things which they have to balance when they make a particular decision that has economy-wide and generational implications. And it's never as easy as just people power. And I think that's led to some paralysis because the choices are between increasing costs, reduced security, and these are things that people are not keen on, of course. I mean, intuitively, wouldn't we love, all of us, that we could just use natural resources, just use the sun and the wind to generate power? It would be a perfect world, and I wish it were so. But it's not the reality, and governments have to deal with that reality, and that's why coal-fired power and the energy debate is so intense. And I think it would be, it's incumbent on all sides of politics to find a lot more common ground, as you see in Europe, so that we can actually make sensible energy and climate change policy that takes us to the proper future that we need.
So I'd just like to comment on this as well, because I think one of the big problems we face, both globally and in this country, is actually political inertia. It takes many, many years, if not decades, to move a system, both politically and indeed our economic and energy infrastructure. There's enormous inertia built into these. We've been working on climate change around the world for 15, 20 years, and how far have we got? We've had Kyoto, didn't work. We've got the debate going on at the moment. We've gone backwards in this country in many respects. This inertia is a reality. We might not like it. I don't like it. I'd like to see more action on climate change. But I think the question is spot on. This is what we need. We need collective consciousness. We need the will of the people to actually make this happen. But it's not happening. That inertia is with us, and it will be with us for decades. And that's why I think coal is going to be with us for decades, and coal power generation.
So, Richard, just to extrapolate from that, are you saying that lack of political will is the thing that stops coal being obsolete?
There's two things. One, I laid out my arguments. One of them is the growth of China and India. But the second one really is to do with this inertia in the political systems of our countries and the world. We will get there. It might be too late, but we will get there. And it's because of the slow nature of actually changing the way that the whole country moves. To get a whole country to move in a direction and say, yes, we want renewables, it's really hard. Bob's been working on it for decades, or at least a couple of decades. It's very hard. Try to get the whole world to move in that direction, and we see it's very, very difficult. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it. I'm a strong advocate. In fact, I feel that we should do it. But hey, we've got to accept the reality of that inertia. Same in the actual energy systems itself. When it comes to switching off these multi-billion-dollar power stations that we only built in China last week, you just can't do that easily. The amount of money, you've got to change the poles and wires. If you want distributed generation, an enormous amount of investment, enormous amount of time, of planning approvals to build new power stations, whatever you want to do. Inertia is a huge issue here associated with actually getting rid of the use of coal, not to mention what I was speaking about earlier. I think there's a future for coal with carbon capture and storage. But either way, we're going to see coal for a long time firing power stations and producing our energy.
So just to respond to that one, it sort of kind of sounds like the reason to keep coal is it's just a little bit too hard. And I suppose if you think about the Berlin Wall, and if you'd asked someone a few years before that came down, could the Berlin Wall come down? Everyone would have said, oh my God, no, that's here to stay. That's probably here for another 100 years. But, when it happened, and when masses of people come together to do something with real intent, then it actually happens surprisingly quickly. And one thing we have found, for example, with the renewable energy target, is that they set a target and the problem is we've been too good at it. So everyone starts going, oh, well, you better pull it back again. So it's always easier, faster and less expensive than people expect.
Sorry, can I just pick up on I just want to pick up on the Berlin Wall example. All those East Germans were actually escaping from an energy-deprived world to go to Western living standards and actually get electricity. So, nice try, though.
And big stretches of the wall were made of coal, apparently. It's a little-known fact.
So, just back to the question of political will, you can understand there's incumbency to the past on both sides of our politics here, and there's fear of the future. We never guess technological change well. And I think I'm probably aligned here with Sinclair's view of the world. Get the government out of the way and let the market determine what's going to happen. The idea that you could propose to ban people from disconnecting to the grid is an extraordinary idea.
Yes, well done.
We're going to go up towards the back there.
Don Stewart, the Prime Minister says coal is good for humanity, and Nicky Webster has eloquently stated the case for coal. It's doubtful if our technological sophistication we now enjoy would have been possible without coal and the other fossil fuels. An offshoot of that technological sophistication is that we're actually able to understand the problems that excessive use of fossil fuels and production of carbon dioxide are causing the planet. Without the coal, we wouldn't have known that. But the other aspect of it is that we also have, because of that technological sophistication, the ability to produce cheap and reliable renewable energies to take the place of coal. So let us thank coal for all it has done for us and let it quietly fade away into the history, like the carbon paper.
Thank you, Don.
Can I make a response?
We might take a couple more from the floor and then do a few from the stage. So there is, up just near Don, there's a woman here with her hand up. Maybe someone else already has the mic. No, it's coming to you.
Hello, my name is Ellen. I'm a student of Chinese culture. I study at a university that invests in fossil fuels. My ancestors would not have survived had coal not existed. But my ancestors didn't know any better, and neither do 70% of the Chinese population, who are supersaturated in regime media. In all my years of Chinese study, I have not, until this week, heard about China truly committing to clean coal. China today was built by whips, not coal, but my gosh, it's built on it today. In 2013, during my studies in Shanghai, I realised this when the government practically banned residents from leaving their homes 4 times in 1 month during winter, not because of weather or political dissent, but because the coal-created pollution was 8 times the maximum international regulations. Industry shuts down and hundreds of millions of dollars are lost while the air clears. I am no longer keen on living in China to further Australian relations in this Asian century, but I will. I have been passionate about this since my first Chinese lesson at age 14. I asked the panel whether they would be willing to risk their health and lives as I will in my career, let alone in the future in a country where up to 70% of people simply aren't aware of coal's dangers.
Thank you. I think Nikki's keen to respond to Don's point first and then possibly Ellen's. I should stress it is Nikki Williams, not Nikki Webster, who was the little girl at the Sydney Olympics. Different person. I had to check.
Look, perhaps I'll start with Ellen first. I mean, I agree. I've been to China many times, and it's the only country where I think you can actually see the air. It's so thick with pollution. And that's because much of the coal that is burnt in China is high sulphur coal, and it's been burned in inefficient old power stations, and that's not desirable in China, India, or anywhere else in the world. And clearly, if we're going to move to controlling greenhouse gas emissions from burning coal, the first thing is to have efficient power stations and high quality coal, which is something actually that Australia happens to produce. So the notion that the coal industry supports the kind of pollution and devastation to which you referred, Ellen, is simply not true. And no one, not you, not me, and certainly not all those billions of people who live in China should be subjected to that. That's why the Chinese government has made large commitments to increasing the share of renewables and increasing the share of nuclear, and it has made large commitments with the United States government to fast-track low-emission coal technologies to deal with the fact that they are going to continue to burn billions of tonnes of the stuff. And this really comes back to Don's point. He's asking us sweetly just to let coal fade away. Well, you can wish it as much as you like, but there is just no authority in the international body in the world that says anything other than that coal use will increase. So if you're concerned about climate change, if you want to do something about that, you've got to use the economic wealth that we have to invest in the technologies that minimise those emissions.
Could I just, I might...
Very briefly, and then we'll go back to the floor.
I'm just going to read something from the International Energy Agency in its Africa Outlook. And it says prospects for coal are also limited by policy. South Africa, the dominant player in African coal, is seeking to diversify its power mix with renewables, regional hydropower projects, gas and eventually additional nuclear capacity, all playing a role in bringing the share of coal in power output down from more than 90% today to less than 2/3 by 2040. So it's not actually growing everywhere.
Sorry, that's a relative figure. In the absolute amount of power generation in South Africa is actually going to increase. So 60% of a bigger number might be bigger than 90% of a smaller number. South Africa certainly does not intend to be poor, and certainly not going to be energy poor. The government is committed to electrification of the country. So it's an absolute increase, not a relative increase.
They also produce a significant amount of their oil from coal and have one of the biggest point emitters of CO2 in the world associated with that.
There's a question just down here.
Hello, my name is Petra Stock. I'm not convinced. Isn't Tasmania and South Australia, isn't coal already more or less obsolete there and people are still living there, right?
We might take that's a terrific and provocative question and debatable in the case of South Australia, but we might take a couple more questions first and then throw it back to the stage.
My name's Michael Steindl. The panel for the opposition said quite a number of things with which I strongly disagreed, but three that really stand out to me is one, you seem to attempt to perpetuate the myth that renewables can't do baseload. They absolutely can. It's called batteries, and those batteries come in various forms. It can be as simple as pumped hydro, put a large dam on the top of a cliff when you've got excess electricity from wind or solar, pump the water up, let it run back down. The generator and pumper, the same thing. Secondly, the third speaker discounted future generations in a way that horrified me. I can't remember the exact wording, but it seemed to me the effect of, we can't know what they'll like or not like or what we'll leave them or not, but we just need to worry about us now. That horrifies me. I think we have a duty to the future generations as much as to ourselves, and I agree maybe that's a moral argument. Thirdly, again on a moral issue, you talked about depriving the new countries, the up-and-coming countries, of their energy and their right to that and their lifestyle resulting from that. We need to balance that against depriving them of life itself, because there are going to be billions of deaths, billions of people unable to be fed. I think maybe they would choose their existing lifestyle over death.
Thank you.
So,
thank you. My name's Andrea Bunting. I was just following from Michael's comment, actually. The first comment that Bob Brown said, that a climate scientist had said, if we keep on the path we're going, at the end of the century we won't be around. Now, I've heard perhaps the Earth could support maybe a billion, half a billion people at the end of the century if we keep on going the way we're going with the burnings of fossil fuels. So here I'm hearing people talking about taking people out of poverty, this great future we're on. The people will not be here. And that is what the climate scientists are saying. We have to grapple with this. This is what we're faced with. We are not going to survive if we continue on this path. We've heard a lot about these magical technologies. I'm an engineer. I've been around for a long time. I've heard about all these hopeful things. They haven't come to pass. We've had some miraculous technological changes, but in the energy area, it has been very slow. We've heard about nuclear fusion for decades. So we have to grapple with, we are facing, as Bob had said, 90% of us will die. And perhaps many of us in this room, and the young people in particular. I'd like to hear a lot more from them as well, what they think of this.
Thank you. And we'll take one more from the floor and then bring it back up onto the stage.
Thank you. My name's Les Kitchen. I've just got two simple factual questions for the panellists. Of coal mined each year, what fraction is used for power production, what for steel production, and how much for other uses like petrol synthesis or chemical feedstocks. And my second question is, of our complete power system, what fraction of the investment is in the power plants themselves and what fraction is in the distribution networks? I mean, that's relevant to if you are changing power plants, how much of the system are you actually going to change? Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get to rebuttals, did anyone want to address any of those last specific statements or questions?
Nicole.
Yes, well, first of all, I completely agree with the lady here in the front. Sorry, I didn't get your name. Change is slow. We've been hearing about fusion for decades. We've been hearing about all of these things for decades. And the reason why coal is going to be with us is because there is slow progress on the technology front. So that's the factual issue. In terms of responding to Michael's point, the last time I gave a speech here at the Wheeler Centre, I actually addressed specifically the issue about future generations. And Lord Stern made the point that if you don't care about future generations, you're not going to care about climate change. And I think he's exactly right. And I actually set out some very clever reasons, which I can't recall off the top of my head right now, but they must have been very clever. I pointed out some very clever reasons why it is that despite our protestations to the contrary, we actually live in a society where people don't really care about future generations. We don't actually care about other people now. And so I'm not convinced that an argument based upon us caring about other people in future is actually a very powerful argument. So my point about future generations is a positive statement, not a normative statement, if that makes you feel better.
So Sinclair is obviously a fan of Groucho Marx. Why should we do anything for future generations? What have they ever done for us? I think most of us would laugh at that. Nikki mentioned 7 billion tonnes of coal is mined. Less than 1 billion is put through steel process, but it ends up as carbon dioxide. So it goes to the atmosphere without any captured technology. That 7 billion tonnes is a phenomenal amount. The amount of erosion that occurs each year from the mountains to the seas is 10 billion tonnes. That's the rate this planet works. We are truly geological agents. So it's not surprising we're interfering with the systems which sustain us.
Just to some of the factual questions, the proportion of coal that's used for steel making or for power generation varies from country to country. In Australia, most of our exports, 60% of our exports are of coking coal for steel production, and the rest, the balance, for electricity production. In this country, we use very little coking coal because we don't make much steel, as you might appreciate. In China, that's a different set of statistics altogether, as it is in Brazil and other places. So that was just a direct answer to that. But I think the questions about our climate scientists, and this is not a climate debate, because we're all concerned about climate change. But the climate scientists, as represented by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have developed a number of scenarios. And one of those scenarios is the horror scenario that you, and indeed Bob, were talking about today. And clearly, that is not a sustainable solution. So if you want a reason, if that was where we were going to end up, that must caution us that we must apply the technologies to improve battery performance and actually facilitate large-scale baseload renewables and carbon capture and storage.
Bob, I don't think anyone answered Petra's question. Is there life in Tasmania?
There's beautiful life in Tasmania. One of our problems is with the Bass Strait cable. It's bringing polluting brown coal-based power into what was a much more pristine environment, but that's part of the way the expensive grid works and upper-going power prices as a result. And we've lost, because the Abbott government bowled over the arrangement I made with Julia Gillard for a clean energy package. The Hydroelectric Commission is going to fail to get $200 million and $70 million a year in future years. That's lost to hospitals and schools and so on. There's a lot of spin-offs from backing coal. And as a Tasmanian, it's a very expensive business importing coal into our coal energy into our state in many ways. We'd much sooner see the mainland follow the South Island and go renewable. I just might add one thing, just quickly. The contention that we don't care about future generations is totally wrong. We've all got it built into our souls. We want to see future generations on this planet, and we want to see them breathing clear air, and we want to see them safe and secure and looking at a beautiful planet, the better because we handed it on. And we'll hand it on better to them when we recognise that coal, like horse and buggies, is obsolete and renewable energy is the way of the future.
So do we want to rein in climate change? Yes. I don't think there's a person in this room that doesn't want to do that. Do we want to rein in, have more renewables? Yes. Can it happen? We'd certainly like it to happen, but the debate tonight is about whether it will or not. And I'm actually a sceptic. I think we will be struggling to actually get rid of coal. And that's really what the debate is about. So just keep that when you're voting. It's not about what you wish for and what you dream for. I'm part of that dream. I'd like to see it happen. But the reality is we're going to be stuck with this coal. And I might, if I may, just make one small comment about the history of coal, because coal has been through many ups and downs in its history. When it first started and they were shipping coals down from Newcastle to London, they ran out of wood, they needed coal. And then suddenly there was a disaster that struck. They got to the water table and they couldn't mine below the water table. They were going to run out of coal. It was a disaster. And technology came to the rescue, the entrepreneurs, the whole system went into play, and over a period of 10 or 15 years, they developed a thing called a steam engine that could actually pump the water out of the pits. And it was that actually started the Industrial Revolution. And then you've heard about the smog. When I was a little kid, actually, in the UK, 25 people died in a park in London from smog. The buildings were black. It was a disaster, the sort of thing you've got in China at the moment. We overcame that with bag houses and technology. And the same thing with acid rain. You remember in the 70s and 80s, we had acid rain, the rivers were polluted, there were no fish in the lakes. We dealt with that with sulphur, capturing the sulphur dioxide. Each time coal has been too valuable for humans to leave in the ground, they've developed a technological solution. And that's what we're going to see happening by 2050. Carbon capture and storage will be actually allowing coal to continue to operate. Thank you.
So
I'm gonna stop you all just for a moment. Richard's done a very sneaky thing by stealth, which is before you've had a chance to vote, he's got a bit of his rebuttal in, which we're going to refer to as a pre-buttal for the purposes of this evening. It is now a chance for you to vote. We're going to hear from each of our 6 panellists for 2 minutes each as you cast your votes. First, for the affirmative, Bob Brown.
Well, the first thing is that Nikki mentioned that China's building a coal-fired power station every 2 weeks. Remember 5 years ago it was every 1 week, and now they're spending more on renewables than they earn on coal. That's the way China's going, and that's because coal-fired power is obsolete. I want to quote from the negative opposite. They say that coal-fired power and its consequences are unfortunate. It's obsolete. They say it's a problem. It's obsolete. They say it's unpopular. It's obsolete. They say we've got to get rid of the emissions. It's obsolete. It said it's been demonised. Nobody wants climate change. That's true. That's why it should be obsolete. We're all going to be struggling to find a future without it, but nevertheless it's obsolete. We've got a coal problem. We've got to fix it, they said. Yes, renewable energy will fix it. Coal is obsolete. And it's totally true that the social costs of coal are not trivial. No, they're huge. They're massive in every way. That's because it's obsolete. Renewable energy is the future. And let me sum this all up by saying coal-fired power won't soon be obsolete. It's obsolete now. It's dead, done and finished. No new power stations in this country. Remember, they didn't list one power station that could be fitted with clean energy technology. My challenge in the first talk, not one. There won't be. They're going to clunk on into the future, but they're out as beautiful renewable energy comes in to give us a much safer future.
Nikki?
Actually, Bob, there is a retrofitted oxy-firing technology at Carlisle Power Station in Queensland. So that's not entirely true.
It's a tittle, you know that.
My comment is, coal will be used whether you like it or not. And I'm not making the case to say that's a good thing. I'm saying that there are pros and cons in every choice of energy that we make. And the coal industry recognises the cons associated with its burning, which include emissions and have included and do include pollution and other kinds of pollution, etc. Clearly, those things must be dealt with. The only way they get dealt with is technology. The only way we afford technology and its innovation is by economic wealth. The only way we have managed to develop sustainable, renewable technologies is through technical innovation. That innovation will continue, and it should. The debate here is about whether coal will become obsolete. It's not whether you'd like it to be obsolete, not whether you prefer a different energy choice. Coal is being used, it will be used. So, if we're serious about climate change, if we don't have an answer to coal use in China and India, we simply don't have an answer to climate change. So the challenge for all of us is to invest in the technologies that will mitigate the worst impacts of climate change.
Lane.
Thank you. Well, look, I'll just quickly make a couple of rebuttal comments before delivering my finding in my report. Firstly, the leader of the negative, well, I believe you used the Prime Minister as evidence in your first speech, so I think enough said about that one. Secondly, with carbon capture and storage, look, the renewable energy industry, which I come from, we'd be happy to compete every day of the week with coal and carbon capture and storage. We know we're cheaper, and we can also produce zero emissions, dispatchable energy as well. And finally, Sinclair, because I can't let you get away scot-free either, there's been a US study that looked into the net benefit of coal generation. So, Sinclair, you asserted that you've got to look at the positive side. What does it do for society? And that study, which was published in a pretty conservative economic publication, found that the net benefit is negative. Okay, so quickly, my report concluded that coal's future is primarily limited by the international arrangements to address climate change, and is expected that the local policies will be implemented to deliver appropriate reductions in emissions. In the event that local politics do not allow appropriate targets to be implemented and enforced, I think then the value of coal assets will be undermined by the resulting political and regulatory uncertainty. And investors will run due to the risk of plunging asset values. And finally, regardless of governments, regardless of wholesale energy markets, consumers will embrace new technologies, as Mike talked about in his speech. They will embrace the alternative supply options because they're available at the lower cost and guard against future price rises. So in summary, there are three major influences which will either act separately or together to bring forward the demise of coal-fired generation.
Just one correction. I was actually quoting Prime Minister Modi, the Indian Premier.
Richard.
So the International Energy Agency have done a number of studies looking at how we can rein in climate change over the last few years, and they keep coming out very, very clearly that carbon capture and storage is absolutely essential if we're going to rein carbon capture and storage in. And indeed, a result of reining in climate change without using carbon capture and storage will cost us substantially more globally. And if we delay, the longer we delay in deploying this important technology, the more the cost of reining climate change goes in. We cannot do this just with renewables. There's a whole section of emissions related to steel, coal, and other industrial processes where you cannot use renewable energy. We still have to use coal there. If we're going to rein in emissions, we need carbon capture and storage. What's happened is, and why the renewables are where they are today, in Australia, they've had a $30 to $40 billion subsidy through the RET and the extra you've been paying on your electricity bills to actually drive down the costs of their technology. This is only just starting in carbon capture and storage. The first project big coal project that's come on in Canada that I referred to earlier, they're now building their second one. It'll be without subsidy, and they're saying their costs, their capital costs will be 20% less, their operating cost will be 20% less. This is the story of the mobile phones from the big brick coming down to the little ones you've got today. We're still at the big brick stage with carbon capture and storage. The renewables are at the point of the mobiles you've had in your pocket. And that's due to the bias in subsidy because people have been demonising coal, because groups like the Greens have been saying, we don't want CCS, there's been not enough money going into it. So CCS can be done, it's proven. It could be applied in the Latrobe Valley. If we'd had the sort of subsidies that it had in renewables in Australia, we would have carbon capture and storage today on Loy Yang Power and some of those big power stations, demonstrating it can happen. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to vote according to the actual thing that we're focusing on. Not a pipe dream, not the pipe dream that the Greens and renewables people are selling you. We need that for sure, but the pipe dream is not a reality. The reality is that we are going to have coal. It's going to be with us for decades, and that's what I think you should consider tonight. It's not a pretty picture, but it's the truth.
Mike. Absolutely, we need storage, and it's coming. It's coming your way soon. Sinclair and this team have painted us as Greens. Actually, I quite like fracking as a geologist. I think these things can be done. It's not whether they're good or bad. It's about how they're going to compete. Already on your rooftop in Victoria, you can put a technology which is cheaper than delivered coal-fired electricity. Okay, you can't run it at night now. So it's a problem. But how do you run it at night? Storage. Storage is coming. It doesn't have to reduce in cost a millionfold. It only has to do it by a factor of 10. Anyone who doesn't understand that is living a dream. Kreider's law tells us that. And once it happens, the way we've constructed the grid has to be totally rethought. And the big loser is the distant large-scale generator, and the distant large-scale generator is coal. I'm not saying this is good, I'm not saying this is bad, I'm just saying this is what's about to happen. It's coming straight at us. We can't avoid it. I was surprised that I could go out and buy this. I could. I bought it from Officeworks. I looked up Wikipedia to find out why I could buy it from Officeworks. It's not entirely a redundant technology. Do you know what this is used for? On-the-spot fines. We have to get out of the way of applying on-the-spot fines just to preserve an old technology. Let the new world come.
Sinclair.
Thank you. I also have an American report from the Centre for Global Development. And if I could just say that, just reading the first paragraph, more than 1 billion people worldwide, and the majority of people living in sub-Saharan Africa lack access to even basic electricity. This energy poverty affects health. Household air pollution from solid fuels used for lighting, heating and cooking contributes to 3.5 million premature deaths per year. Education. Most African school children attend school with no electricity and cannot study effectively in the dark. And jobs. Lack of reliable and cost-effective electricity is among the top constraints to growth. This is in sub-Saharan Africa. What does the report say? We conservatively estimate that more than 60 million additional people in poor nations could gain access to electricity if the Overseas Private Investment Corporation were allowed to invest in fossil fuels and not just renewables. So 60 million people that we are leaving behind if we move away from fossil fuels and just stick with renewables. And then, of course, finally, I don't often agree with Bob Brown, so I actually want to milk this point. He made a very, very good point about politicians responding to the will of the people when it comes to all these climate policies and energy policies, and that it's the will of the people that's actually quite important. And this is true. People want prosperity. We know this. We've just come through a massive social experiment here in Australia where we put a price on carbon in order to deal with carbon change. The government that did that got bundled out at the polls, very unpopular. Just this week I received my refund from AGL for $260 for my first quarter. Thank you very much, the government. Abbott's given me something at long last. So the point is, people want prosperity first and foremost. Secondary issues is how we energize that prosperity. And I think anything that places people's current prosperity at risk will be treated poorly. And that is one of the reasons why we are not going to be moving away from a coal-fired future anytime soon, absent the kind of disruptive technology that we have seen in energy, in information technology. Until we see that disruptive technology occurring, and that is not wind power, that is not solar power, that is not hydropower, that has to be something different or a new way of delivering it, or batteries technology needs to come a long way. I've noticed my phone is down to 40%. I don't want to be out too late because I'm going to have no phone in my battery or no power in my battery. So all these other technologies are poor substitutes right now, and the electorate are not going to live for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sinclair, I don't think you could have made it more clear you don't have an iPhone if you've got 40% left. I'm down to 2% and it's killing me. How lucky we are. At the Wheeler Centre, we try to hold public conversation in a range of different ways through the year. And one of our reservations about a debate is it reduces things down to a binary, when often they're more complicated than that. And I think how lucky we were tonight to hear such passionate and articulate arguments, not from people who are divided along ideological lines, but from people who are divided along lines of an argument about how to do our best by future generations. So please join me in thanking the two panels. On your way in, you were polled about the proposition that coal-fired power would soon be obsolete. 14% of you on the way in were undecided. 27% of you were against the proposition, and 59% of you were in favour of the proposition. At the end of the night, the undecideds had dropped down to 9%. But those against the proposition stayed the same at 27%, and overwhelmingly you found in favour of the proposition for, at 64%, you've concluded coal-fired power will soon be obsolete. I will say this, my own future generation will be getting a lump of coal in their Christmas stockings if they don't lift their game between now and the end of the year. So that's something to consider. Not entirely obsolete, it would appear. Thanks to all the members of the House for your support and participation. I declare this debate closed.